Welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio, your essential source for everything building and fire safety. My name is Tim Spears, and I bring you the latest on safety regulations and emerging trends. Get ready for engaging discussions, expert insights, and how we can all collaborate to build a safer environment. Today, we're diving into the hydrogen revolution with Jennifer Hamilton from the California Hydrogen Business Council. We explore the new funding surge for hydrogen hubs, discuss myths and hydrogen's vital role in decarbonizing the future. Join us for a dynamic chat on the challenges, safety, and potential of hydrogen fuel technology. Jennifer, welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited. Like we were just talking a minute ago before we started, with the recent allocation from the Department of Energy on the hydrogen hubs, I thought that this would give us a good opportunity to talk about hydrogen fuel. Many of us talk a lot about lithium-ion battery technology, but this gives us a little bit different idea or a different fuel type that we should probably be talking about, because quite a bit of financing or quite a bit of funding was just provided. So,
well,
all right.
It will be as soon as all the proper documentation is signed, right? But yes, very excited about the announcement for California, for sure. California has led the nation in hydrogen and really launched the first market for it with the light duty transportation sector. So we're very excited. The Arches Consortium that was developed, that put in the proposal, that's received the award announcement. My organization, the California Hydrogen Business Council, along with my former organization I was with for many years, the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership, both have over the years worked closely with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and we continue that relationship with the different entities that hopefully will be involved, in Arches. So it's a big family of people and projects and companies, and definitely a very large undertaking, and we're excited for it.
Yeah, it's going to be a big partnership. If I'm not mistaken, and maybe you can correct me, I thought it said $1.2 billion was coming to California as part of this hydrogen hub project.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
that is just, $1.2 billion, not $1 million. It's a B with a billion. That's that's a big deal. No pun intended. But I think that's one of those things that, as we start to take a look at it, and actually I'll just go into one of my questions is we talk about infrastructure, and I think about infrastructure in the sense that most of us drive, hydrocarbon fueled cars, right? We drive gasoline, diesel, but there's not a lot of hydrogen fuel stops from what I see when I pull off the freeway, the interstate. So as we talk about that, what are some of the challenges with, adopting hydrogen and, the infrastructure, some of those challenges with the infrastructure, and how is, the California Hydrogen Business Council addressing it?
Yeah. So there's a lot to answer in that. So at the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership, where I was previously, we did concentrate on transportation. At California Hydrogen Business Council, our membership is much broader, and we cover really the whole span of the hydrogen market. And so that includes not only transportation, but stationary power generation, and so forth. So, the one thing to say is that it's not an either or for electric versus hydrogen. It's an and. We have to have both.
Okay.
And that is in every sector, because not one technology can solve all of the issues. And,
right.
A lot of people historically have liked to talk about efficiency. Really, it's about decarbonizing, and it's really getting us away from the carbon emissions and the things that are causing problems with our air quality and
Hmm.
climate change and things like that. So, and California's always been very ambitious in setting targets and goals for those things.
Right.
So, like any new market, there are challenges, right? And any new
Right.
technology, there are challenges. So I don't want to really separate out from, hydrogen versus other things, but to say that, um, again, like with all new technologies, there are hiccups and bumps along the
Yeah.
way. So we
Yep.
did launch a light duty passenger vehicle market and infrastructure. The cars are wonderful. I drive one myself. I'm a Toyota
Huh.
Mirai customer. I'm on my second car. I love it, love it, love it. But we have seen some challenges as of late, especially with infrastructure, because those stations are seeing very high utilization. And so
Okay.
then we're, seeing the technical challenges that come from that, right?
Right.
And we
Right.
have
Yeah.
heard that with battery electric vehicle charging, they've had some, not same, but similar challenges with, the charging station being up when it needs to be, or,
Right.
getting full charges and things like that. So some of the
Yep.
similar customer experience issues across the board. Um, what a lot of the attention on is on right now in terms of transportation is the heavy duty market, because
Hmm.
there is a lot of advantage to having hydrogen fuel cell trucks, um,
Right.
versus, and it is a versus battery thing in that case because of the kind of trade-offs that you have,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
other things, one of the other buzzwords is the hard to decarbonize sectors. And so those are really large industrial sectors like steel production, concrete. In transportation, it's maybe rail, marine, and um, mining, off road.
Okay.
So, and, I think in all of those, there are opportunities for
Right.
both battery and fuel cell. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so it's just kind of figuring out where those best opportunities lie. In terms of the stationary side, with, you know, power, and, we work with the utilities, and there are known challenges in the near future for moving to electrifying a lot of things in terms of what the grid
Hmm.
can handle and what the
Right.
capacity
The
is, and
capacity.
knowing
Yeah.
how long it takes to build out projects. So
Uh-huh.
hydrogen, it can really be a good energy medium, energy storage
Right.
medium, excuse me,
Uh-huh.
long duration energy storage, and work in conjunction with battery. And what we are facing too in the hydrogen world is to really not put too many restrictions on it from a production
Hmm.
and distribution standpoint, um, because we really need for that new market to grow, and we really
Yeah.
need to have all of our options available for decarbonizing our energy sector.
Yeah. And we'll talk a
So
little bit, because, oh, sorry, go ahead. No worries, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, aren't you glad you asked that question? It was it was packed with with
It
stuff.
was one of
So
those,
I'll
it was
try to
like
make
right
my
out of the
future
gate.
answers more
Yeah.
succinct.
No worries, no worries at all. Well, I actually always try to start with the easy question first, just like tell me a bit about your background and your role with the California Hydrogen Business Council. I really kind of missed that, but I thought it was a good opportunity to talk a little bit about infrastructure as we talked about the DOE funding. But can you tell us a little bit about your background and your role as deputy director with the California Hydrogen Business Council?
Sure. So it's kind of a funny story. I by training, my education, this was completely not in my uh trajectory, right? I was an ag major. I was an animal science major, and stumbled into this area kind of by accident, back in 2006. So I've been in it for
Oh,
a
wow.
while now, and have been, working with some real, there's people that I have known since I started in the industry that were in it before me. So there
Mm.
is some real dedication and real longevity. And I, as I said, was at the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership, which used to be called the California Fuel Cell Partnership. And part of my role there was, um, as a safety officer, but also to develop and deliver educational material for first responders around hydrogen and fuel
Okay.
cells and response considerations for both
Mm-hmm.
like a fueling station as well as the vehicles. And so that developed and matured and kind of grew into the material that you see now on the Center for Hydrogen Safety and the H2 Tools resources, which, I'm pretty proud of because that came a long way. And over the course of my time at the Fuel Cell Partnership, I also got into safety codes and standards. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've been very active in that realm. So I'm familiar with ICC and the fire code and
Yep.
NFPA, and also, the other organizations like CSA and UL and SAE International, and I could name off a whole bunch of letters and the alphabet soup. And
Right.
so in coming to the California Hydrogen Business Council, I just moved in April of this year,
Okay.
and I really wanted to expand, sort of spread out into the advocacy and policy side of things.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So it plays on the education component, right? Because it's still a lot of talking to
Right.
people and educating people, but with a little bit different twist to it. And then, of course, really having to get into more of the other applications for hydrogen besides the transportation. So,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
as deputy director, I one of my major roles is to lead our policy initiatives.
Okay.
So working with our members in the government affairs realm and our lobbyists to, write comments, submit comments to the different state
Mm-hmm.
agencies on their various pieces of legislation and regulation.
Right. Yep.
Also to develop our policy priorities for our organization, which is based on consensus, and we work under antitrust and everything. But, because we
Right.
have a very diverse membership, sometimes that's easier said than done. But
Yeah.
but we've been
Yeah.
pretty successful thus far. So glad to say.
Yeah. I was going to say that, there's a lot of different, as I look at your about section on your website, there's uh, a lot of organizations that you represent. And I would imagine that each of those organizations that are part of the Business Council have different perspectives sometimes when it comes to hydrogen fuel. And how do you make sure to address them all and kind of work towards that same common goal? Because I think at the end of the day, the idea is being able to promote hydrogen and be able to promote it safely and be able to decarbonize the environment. And so I think that those are all big things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we work on a consensus basis. So, even if we don't get a yes from everybody, if we don't get an absolute no,
Right.
that's,
Yeah.
and so we do, one of my exercises has been later, in these last months of the year, was to work with our members in those policy initiatives to develop our priorities moving into
Mm-hmm.
2024, based on what we're
Yeah.
seeing in the market and stuff. And actually it's, we have a really great active membership. And so it made my job that much easier. And if we don't come to consensus on something, we do have a process to take it
Right.
up to a higher level and, get a decision. And sometimes there's times when we don't have a comment because we don't have a position because of the nature of, whatever the topic is that it doesn't benefit all our members. So
Right.
it's a balance
Yep.
for sure. But safety, we established a relationship with the Center for Hydrogen Safety, and we're working, getting close to finalizing one with the Compressed Gas Association, all around the safe deployment of hydrogen, safe use, education, training, all that is so important. That, like you said, when we were talking before, I joke and I say, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard Hindenburg over the last 18 years, I would be retired by now, but so, absolutely that is still, a huge part, and it's still very grassroots, frankly, the education. So we do what we can to amplify the resources that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a big part of the challenge, is making sure people know that there are standards that have been developed and revised over the past 25 years, and even going farther back than that, because hydrogen's been an industrial commodity for decades, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep.
what has really changed and what's newer is the applications we're looking at today
Hmm.
in transportation, energy storage, power, things like that. Um, but I mean, hydrogen's been produced, distributed,
Yeah.
handled, stored relatively safely for decades,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with any transition or any change, there's always apprehension, right? With any new technology, truly, there's
Sure.
always some apprehension. And how do we implement it with these new applications and be able to do it safely? And as you mentioned, they're really, knock on wood. I mean, we haven't had major issues associated with it for quite some time. You mentioned Hindenburg, but I think that was some 60 years ago or better.
More than that. More than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like 75 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
So so with that, you're going to get that apprehension, but how do it's one of those things, as you mentioned, the advocacy part, right? Being able to
mhm.
advocate and be able to get that message out there and all the different, and working with, you named off of a lot of agencies and talking about safety initiatives, anywhere from the Center for Hydrogen Safety. I was even going to ask you NFPA, like NFPA, UL, ICC, as we talk about safety considerations and those types of things.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And there is a wealth of knowledge in all of those organizations. ISO is another one,
yeah.
International Standards
Oh, yeah.
Organization, um, because this is a global market. You know,
Yeah.
there are
Yep.
many other places in the world, and even more. I mean, we just had a meeting today where there was been a lot of announcements of hydrogen projects, clean hydrogen projects, and decarbonized hydrogen projects in, uh, African countries, and
Mm.
we've known about them in European countries, and I mean, it's just really, really, there's a lot of attention on it right now, and I think it's fantastic because there's a ton of opportunity. Uh, One of the kind of main talking points when I first started in this industry was that hydrogen promotes energy independence because
Yeah.
there's so many feedstocks for it, and you can make it
Hmm.
using local resources. That and it also in this climate also is jobs creation.
Hmm.
It cleans up the air when you put it into a fuel cell vehicle, and it's zero tailpipe emissions. That's reducing vehicle emissions, which are a huge factor in
Right.
air quality,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
there's a lot of advantages, but absolutely, um, there's apprehension with anything new, any new
Right.
technology. And so
Yeah.
what we did in the first responder um, material, for example, is to try to put
Hmm.
hydrogen into context with other fuels and other things the first responders are a little more familiar with and used to dealing with on a more daily basis,
Okay.
if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
So we compare properties to propane, natural gas, natural gas, gasoline
Yep.
vapor, things that again are more familiar, just to put things
Yeah.
into context.
Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, like you mentioned, natural gas, we pipe that all into our homes, right? I mean, it's not,
right.
not uncommon. I mean, it is a gas that we're already pumping into our homes. Propane. I used to live in a rural area where I had, the propane truck come out and deliver propane, and that's how I heated my house.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people like to talk about the rainbow colors of hydrogen. What we, again, are really focused on is the carbon intensity, right?
Yeah.
Um, and also, reducing emissions. And, even if, like in the power sector, even if it's combusting hydrogen and you want to move away from that, that's fine, but it's a step to getting away
Hmm.
from the emissions and the repercussions of the traditional forms of combustion and power generation, right? So
Right.
it's we can't let perfect be the enemy of good, and that's kind of cliche, but it's absolutely applicable
Right.
in this sense,
Yep.
because
Yep.
there is some effort to really put some very stringent requirements immediately around hydrogen. And again, this is a new market, and
Yeah.
we got to let it grow. So
Yeah. Well, so as we kind of talk about that, there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of apprehension. What are some of the larger misconceptions and apprehension do you see around the hydrogen market and the implementation of hydrogen, and how do you work past it? Like, how do you try to share information on an advocacy part?
right. Um, when I first started, again, everyone was like, "Oh, the Hindenburg, and it's so flammable and it's so dangerous." Um, so again, putting it into context, yes, it's a fuel. No fuel is inherently safe, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, we design the systems that we use with those fuels so that we can use it, quote unquote, safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we
Mm-hmm.
understand the properties of the fuel we're using. Same thing with hydrogen, right?
Right.
More recently, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen leakage because it is a very light, buoyant gas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it can be difficult to contain, but there are also a lot of things that have been understood and developed, like materials compatibility, like hydrogen gas sensing, because there is, it's a commodity. It's worth some
Yeah.
money, and if it's worth money, you're not going to want it to leak out, right?
No. Right.
so
Exactly.
so there's an incentive there to keep that from happening. Plus, we understand that we don't want, large amounts of hydrogen leaking from our systems, which are closed
Right.
systems, because
Yeah.
it could be potentially dangerous. And we understand those things, right?
Right.
Um,
Yep.
and then there's also some, um, I don't know, I would say it's fairly controversial, um, stuff coming out about it being a greenhouse gas. And I mean, that's a rabbit hole we're not going to go down, partly because I know some about it, but not enough about it. But it's
Right.
it's something that is being debated currently, right?
Right. Yep.
For the general public, I think it's understanding what the benefits are in terms of the improvements to, emissions and air quality, the decarbonizing of our energy sector, how it
Mm-hmm.
can potentially be a smooth replacement and transition. For example, with the light duty passenger vehicle, the whole goal is for it to be just as easy and familiar as gasoline is in terms of fueling and driving. And it
Right.
really is.
Yeah.
Again, it's the challenges we've had with the utilization of the infrastructure and, but when just like we were talking about, when technology works, it's great. Same
Uh-huh.
thing when,
Yeah.
when there's plenty of fueling infrastructure and there's no disruptions and there's no technical issues, it's very smooth and it's very easy,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's a learning curve, just like, again, any new technology. Shoot, I'm a Gen Xer and I'm still sometimes curmudgeony about my iPhone. So
Me too. I am as well. And I laugh because I remember the days without it. It's like
I
I
know,
really
right?
truly don't need it, but when I leave the house without it, then I feel like I'm missing something. Like,
Like you're missing your right arm, right?
yeah, yeah, it's crazy. I remember when I was a kid, and I'm sure you probably do too. And I was just talking about this because my daughter had to take her SAT last weekend, and there was always that teacher that says you're never going to have a calculator always in your pocket. I have a
Yes,
calculator
I
on my
do.
wrist now. Yeah. I always have a calculator with me. I mean, I have everything. I mean, I can Google if I have a question. I can Google it. So, but
I
that
know.
just
Now
goes to
my
show
kids
you.
ask me a question and I go, I don't know. Let's look that up.
Yeah. Let me go get the encyclopedia, and I'm gonna flip a couple pages in that encyclopedia.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I
Oh
know.
goodness. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to me to be a part of this whole transition because it is something
Yeah.
akin to, moving from horse-drawn buggy to motor vehicle, or moving from town
Right.
gas to electricity,
Yep.
or, one of those huge
Yep.
transitions. And
Yeah.
it's, also knowing, to be a little bit mushy for a minute, it's also knowing that I'm doing my part to try to leave a better world for my kids, right?
Yep. Yep.
And hopefully their kids. And that, it's really meaningful when we have our federal government making that kind of investment
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
this. It really is a signal that this is something big. So
Yeah, I think that we're really undergoing some type of revolution right now. We had the Industrial Revolution, what, in the early 1900s, and now
Hmm.
we're in the AI revolution and the green energy revolution. I think that there are so many technologies out there that I think that we're just kind of on the edge of it now. But I would say in 10 years, those cycles typically are starting to get shorter and shorter in the sense of how quickly we're going to be able to get through it and be on the other side of it. And I really kind of hope that we're starting to see some of that transition now. I think that AI, ChatGPT was just released a year ago, a couple years ago, and now there's multiple other versions out there that that offer something like that. The lithium-ion battery, the electric car, and now we're talking about hydrogen, and hydrogen's always been there, but now we're now having a large investment into the hydrogen world to try to be able to make it a little bit more attainable for everyone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
And
like
I will
you
just say,
mentioned, yeah,
I just wanted to just throw in there that when we say electric vehicle, everybody assumes plug-in battery, but a fuel
right,
cell electric vehicle is just that. It just makes its electricity in real time using
right,
the hydrogen stored on board in the fuel cell, as opposed to plugging it in. So it's
yep,
another kind of electric vehicle, and that comes in the form of not the passenger cars, but buses and trucks, and now we have rail projects and all kinds of things. So it's just really, one of the things that drew me to this industry in the first place was um, the vast uses for hydrogen and fuel
mm-hmm,
cells. Um,
mm-hmm,
and we're seeing that come to fruition. So I think that's really exciting too, because it can be as small as handheld stuff, right? Or as
yeah.
large as a passenger train.
Right. Yeah, and that'd be interesting to see as we talk about rail projects here in California to be able to run it on hydrogen
Mm-hmm.
and be able to offer more opportunities, for more mass transit. That would be actually kind of an interesting thing to see, especially we're talking about. I don't know if high speed rail would function off of hydrogen, but at least if there's more opportunities there to increase mass transit, especially here in the state of California. Um, as we talk about hydrogen, what are some of those key messages that, as you talk, with others about the benefits of hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells, what are some of those key messages that you try to share as part of your advocacy?
Well, um, right now we're working to kind of on the more granular level. We're working to get a good definition for clean green hydrogen for the state. We're working to develop some pay structures for the power generation side and the
Mm,
utility side. Um, but it's frankly been a lot of effort in educating our policymakers and decision makers in and trying to sort of give the rebuttal to some of those more recent arguments that have come about. Um,
hmm
we have an event we do in June, which brings together industry, communities, policymakers, staffers, decision makers, and has some really great topical panel discussions to so that they can see what's happening in the market, what's happening with the boots on the ground in the real world, right?
Right.
Which can sometimes and oftentimes be different than maybe what is perceived, I guess, right?
hmm hmm
I just had a conversation today with a company who's doing some great things in the Central Valley with green hydrogen right now, and I mean they have some incentive financially, but they're really stepping out there and stepping up, and that's
Right.
one example. I mean, there's a lot of different
hmm
kinds of projects, but that one sticks out because I just was speaking with that person. So, and that's outside of all of the policy stuff that's going on. They're moving
Right.
ahead, right? So
Yeah.
it's exciting to see.
Yep.
And it's a positive thing.
Right.
There's a lot of talk and a lot of emphasis from Department of Energy with the hubs on not only jobs creation, but EJ, environmental justice, disadvantaged communities, really bringing those communities in and having them be an active part. And
hmm
I
hmm
think that's fantastic. And we want it to all be positive. We don't want there to be
Right.
any perception like we're forcing anything, because
Right.
it's really those communities that are the most disadvantaged in the port areas, for example, right? And all the diesel trucks running
Hmm.
through their neighborhoods or past their neighborhoods on the freeways. And
Right.
so the projects we've seen with fuel cell electric trucks doing drayage and running out of the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach with hydrogen and fuel cells, and that is, a really positive, promising thing.
Well, that's
So
good to,
highlighting
yeah,
stuff
with
like
that
that
transition.
and really doing
Yeah.
that outreach and education. Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, those are all, positive projects. Now, we kind of touched on it a little bit, as we talk about key messaging, and one of that key messaging is that it can be done safely, right? And what I mean by
Hmm.
safely is there's bound to be some regulation associated with it. So how do you work, as you mentioned, working with government entities, and I'm sure you work with legislatures, but also working with model code organizations such as ICC and NFPA and even UL on on the listings. How do you work with them to be able to make sure that it's done safely?
Yeah. So, getting the right experts onto those committees that are developing the product standards,
Hmm. Hmm.
is key. We have that. Um, we are in, for example, a revision cycle for NFPA 2, which is the Hydrogen Technologies Code. And, um, there's a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of input. There was a lot of input last time to improve, um, the foundation that's laid there based on the data and the science and the experience from the industry. So, as an
Hmm.
example, in the last iteration of NFP2, there were changes to the setback distances for liquid hydrogen, bulk liquid hydrogen storage for
Okay.
projects, right? And that was
Right.
based on a lot of science and a lot of work done by Sandia National Laboratory and other stakeholders that really put the science behind the code language, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and there's a lot of modeling, a lot of work that goes into that is very detailed engineering.
Yeah.
Most all of it goes over my head, but I mean I get the gist of it, right? Um,
Right.
and frankly, it's baby steps. I mean, it's not like they
Yeah.
make these huge, giant, bold changes to things because we want to be safe and we want to be conservative and we
Yep.
want to make sure
Yep.
that what we're implementing, is going to be the safest for all of the users and everyone in the
Right.
community around it. So
Yeah.
it's, sometimes there's people that express some frustration, but it's we'll get there. It's just
Yeah.
we want to make sure we're doing it in the best way.
Yeah,
So
like you said, it's incrementally, right? I mean, you have to be
yeah,
able to do incrementally, because if you go too hard too fast, then you're gonna have, and
and
there's a
something
major incident,
happens.
there's gonna, yeah, people are gonna want to pull it back. And so
Hmm.
I always, whenever I always think anytime you try to implement change, it has to be done incrementally, because you got to be able to, it's kind of like a science experiment in a sense. Like you want to, change something, see if it, is it positive or negative? And if it's positive, we continue to move forward. If it's negative, then we go back and we redevelop a hypothesis, and then we test it
Yeah,
again, and we just keep going that way.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So I mean, again, getting the right experts in there, and these documents too, in these standards development organizations, they go through rigorous review process and they're consensus based documents. So it's not
yep,
a certain interest that's
right,
writing these standards, right? It's
yep,
everybody involved, and
yeah,
sometimes that's
yep.
painful, but it's how it happens.
Yeah. Yeah, with that consensus process, sometimes, like, I'm sure you mentioned earlier, being able to, with all your organizations that you represent as part of the business council, is, that being a consensus. Code development is a consensus. Not everybody always agrees. I'm sure you've been to a code hearing or two where people are up at the mic, and you've got A says it's good, B says it's bad, and there's a lot of back and forth. And at the end, y'all vote, and if it moves forward, great. If it doesn't, then hey, maybe we can offer a public comment to be able to take care of some of those questions or comments that somebody had. But yeah, it's
Yeah, there's always a process to
consensus.
follow,
Yeah,
Adam.
yeah.
I'm a fan of trying to find the middle ground, but if you can't do that, there's a process you can follow to get your voice heard. So,
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just hopefully we can get through it, and we can find different ways. And you mentioned all the different professionals. Preparing for today, I found even stories from the University of California system that's also looking at hydrogen, and I'm sure that you work, the Business Council works with them as well in the sense of working with different fuels and identifying what the benefits are and how we can do it safely. So there's a lot of science behind it, and I think that we're, like I mentioned earlier, I think that we're just at the very beginning of it, to be able to see, kind of this expansion of it in the transportation sector. So
I mean, it's amazing how far I think the hydrogen industry for these applications has come in the last, it hasn't even, I mean, really as hard as they've been working on it, maybe 25 years,
hmm
um, and you think about how long it's taken more conventional fuels to get to where we are. They've had a lot longer
yeah,
time to do that. So
100%. Yeah,
it's really a much faster pace and push to get to
yeah,
a much farther point much faster.
yeah,
Does that make sense? Um,
yep, yep,
Now with this transition, I mean, the magnitude of
right,
the transition we're in for energy and the pace at which
yep,
we're going and the point we have to
yeah,
be at the timelines we're
right,
trying to meet is just like
yeah,
really sort of
yeah. It's a
amazing. And
challenge.
but
Yeah,
you gotta set goals and try to meet those or do the
yep.
best you can. So
Well,
yeah,
and I thought about this as I was kind of preparing a couple things today. When we first started, when we first started driving motor vehicles that were gas powered, I'm sure that there was a lot of fear and apprehension. But we have had I was the first Model T, or the first combustion engine in 1910, or somewhere about that time, and now we're in 2023, and so we've had well over 100 years of looking at a
right.
combustion engine and how that operates. I mean, we had steam,
Yeah.
and now we're using hydrocarbon fuels, and now we're here to these green energy technologies and trying to implement them. And it's just a matter of time before we make them a little bit more efficient, and but we've got to test it, right? It's going to be one of those things that we as we talk about, we want to make sure that it's done safely, and we have the sufficient regulations in place. But everybody wants to be where we're at with the combustion engine and be able then to apply that with that same level of efficiency with these greener technologies. So just going to
Yeah,
take a little bit more
and
time.
it does, and it's not to get too philosophical, but it's a challenge to get as large of a population as we have to make this wholesale shift,
hmm
right? So it's
Yeah.
going to be a quite a long transition period, but again, I'm excited for it, and I think in our lifetime we're definitely going to see a lot of progress
Yeah.
on this, and hopefully see some improvements in the kind of climate events we're seeing going on right now, because
Yeah.
um I I know there's different thoughts on that, but the evidence is all around us. So
Yeah. So hopefully we can get to the point where I think that, like we talked about, those advancements in technology are getting shorter, right? My iPhone, I mean, we talked about having an iPhone. Now I'm wearing really the iPhone on my wrist. I have more technology on my wrist than probably that powered the space shuttle. And so there, or the first space shuttle, not SpaceX and how it comes down. I mean, there's a lot more technology associated with that than I can even
NASA
imagine. But
uses a lot of hydrogen, by the way.
they do, yeah,
Yes,
yep.
they're a
So
hydrogen
I
expert.
just, yeah, it's just one of those things that we're going to start seeing more and more of that technology kind of come out. I mean, and we learn a lot from the space program. Wasn't Velcro, and it was Velcro was invented by the
They
space
used fuel
program.
cells in the
Yeah,
60s
yeah,
on their
yep.
spacecraft. Yeah.
And so over time, I think we're just going to continue to make it more and more efficient. And like you mentioned, you drive a hydrogen powered car. and being able to do that. I mean, they're on the market, and so now with that being said, what are if I can ask some advantages and maybe some disadvantages, and maybe I would think that the disadvantage might be infrastructure, being able to find locations to fuel up, or those locations might be busy because like very similar to charging stations, and electric cars.
Yeah. Well, so we have seen fueling stations. So um, the fueling station network we have now in California, predominantly it's hydrogen storage and dispensing located at traditional gasoline fueling stations, and that's
Okay.
for zoning reasons and things like that, right? You have to
Yep.
have an adequate footprint because you have to meet the code and the setbacks, or be
Hmm.
able to show alternate means and methods and meet the intent, and still have the safety level and
Right.
everything that is in the code. So, um, and like I said, there's been a few different reasons why we've had challenges. Sometimes there are disruptions to the fuel supply. And so
Hmm.
that's something that we're really looking for the hydrogen hubs to help alleviate, is really increasing. Again, hydrogen's been an industrial commodity. There's a lot of hydrogen made and
Right.
distributed, but it's for those industrial uses. And so the transportation sector had been sort of at the tail end of that, right? And it's a
Hmm.
relatively small market and uses a small bit. But
Yeah.
if there's a natural disaster, or there's a maintenance issue at a major production plant, guess who's the first to get cut off, right? Is
Right.
the smaller guy. So
Yeah.
um
Yep.
so having dedicated supply is very important, but also um you know we've talked a lot about economies of scale and really getting
Hmm.
the numbers of stations, the numbers of components, the numbers of manufacturers of those components up to the point where the market really takes over, and it's not sort of one off and onesie twosies, right? And
Right.
we're that's progressing. It's just
Right.
not been at the same pace as the development of the vehicles. So
Okay.
my car is fantastic, right? It's got all the bells and
Yep.
whistles. It's a luxury vehicle. It's beautiful. It runs great. It's like everything, right? Um,
Right.
so it's and I think people might say the same thing or similar things about their Tesla, and then trying to do a long trip and find a place to
Right.
charge, and getting a full charge and things like that. I mean,
Right.
we've heard some stuff about that. So again, it's not either one. We're not pitting them against each other. We need both. Um,
Right.
for me personally, as a consumer, a fuel cell vehicle fits my lifestyle because I can fuel it and go just like I do my gas car.
Hmm.
I don't have to, and
Right.
I don't have to worry about, do I have enough charge to get to this point, right? Or do I have
Mm.
to wait and plan my trip
Right.
to, be
Right.
able to charge? So, um, you know, it depends on what fits your lifestyle, and there needs to be choices for consumers for sure. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I don't
Yep.
think it's going to be successful to say, as California, we're getting off of internal combustion engine vehicles, and oh, by the way, the only option you have is a plug-in battery electric. You know,
Right.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't going to sit well. I don't think so.
Right. Yeah.
um,
Well, as we
yeah,
talk
for
about like
me,
California. Yeah. Oh, go
I
ahead.
was
I'm
just going to
sorry.
say that's my personal take on it, and other people have different opinions, and that's fine. But again,
Right.
you can't say it enough. It's not or, it's and.
Right. Now we talk about California, right? And as we talk about California, a lot of times is leading the way as it relates back to some of the green energy initiatives. But how does what we do in California maybe shape the global efforts and really the efforts within across the country?
Yeah, like I said, we've really led the nation in we have the zero emission vehicle regulation, which is
Hmm.
where the California Fuel Cell Partnership started out because of, right?
Hmm.
And the automakers were, have been told you will make zero emission vehicles, and that's zero emissions out the tailpipe. So that's a plug-in battery electric or a hydrogen fuel cell.
Right. Yep.
And then we've had other states in the country adopt what we call ZEV states that have adopted California's emissions requirements. We've seen, I think that sort of I think if I recall correctly, there was a federal adoption making it more of a national market, so it wasn't like a state by state market. And I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that happened some years ago. And California, we're the fourth largest economy in the world. So people, other countries look to us and look to the US. And so, we've got good working relationships in the hydrogen industry for years with Japan and Korea and, the European countries and, Australia. And so it's really, I think we've, had a lot of influence as a state, but also as a country. I mean, our Department of Energy has had a fuel cells technology office, and for some years we've worked with codes and standards and safety with them for as long as I've been in it and before. So that's always been a top priority. In fact, it was the Department of Energy that sponsored the educational materials that you see on the Center for Hydrogen Safety. So they've been very integral in that. We had a hydrogen sort of prop vehicle, like a flame prop vehicle that we took around for a little while. Actually took it to Hawaii. We've taken it around California. And done some drills with first responders after, sitting through a slide presentation and hearing about the properties of hydrogen and response and things like that. And it's not so much to say, they know how to fight a vehicle fire, right? But it's to give them some experience with hydrogen and sort of try to emulate what a scenario might be like to, we know that in general, first responder community is very hands-on. They have to be, right? They have to understand what it is they're dealing with. And so,
absolutely.
DOE sponsored all of that. And I think, we've been a real leader in a lot of things, hydrogen, and had really good interactions. I mean, we are very involved in ISO, again, in the International Standards Organization, with all those other countries I mentioned that are all, very involved and developing documents that can be used in a world market. So
not just making it so what's the word I'm looking for, so limited, so that way it's only applicable to California, right? Being able to share those resources across the country, across the globe, that might have some interest in implementing some hydrogen technology or hydrogen fuel technology. Now, one of the things that I think, being a, fire and building code centric podcast, and as I talk about building professionals and fire code professionals, what resources do you recommend? Somebody that worked for the fuels, the California fuel, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher that. The California fuel cell, there's one more word and I can't think of it.
Partnership was it was my previous organization.
Partnership, Yep. And then the Hydrogen Business Council. So what resources would you recommend? I mean, we talked a little bit about the Department of Energy, but there are other resources out there. If I was a fire code official or a building official looking, because I get a new project, or I might be that building official, their fire code official that sees the hydrogen hub coming to my to my area. What resources would you suggest that I look up?
Yeah. So the good thing is there's knowledge, or there's resources out there, but there's a couple places to point to. So we are actually building a safety codes and standards page to point to all of those. But of course, as you point out, there's the Department of Energy. They have the Hydrogen and Fuel Cells Technology Office. They have the H2IQ. So there's webinars and things. There's which are very informative. There was actually one this year on the changes to NFPA 2. covering sort of, what major changes happened between the 2020 and 2023 versions.
Mm-hmm.
There is the Center for Hydrogen Safety. They have extensive safety resources on there, from best practices, lessons learned. The Hydrogen Safety Panel, who are a group of experts with cumulatively over 400 years of experience in hydrogen and hydrogen safety. So there's publications by them and different resources from the panel.
Sure.
There's a codes and standards database and search. You can search the different standards. They're also developing, or they also have training materials. So I mentioned the first responder training materials, but there's also other safety materials for like hydrogen users and things like that. The Compressed Gas Association has some really accessible resources with their standards, and they have a interactive sort of map of the different elements of the hydrogen value chain. So from production to distribution to storage, and you can hover over that, and then it gives you a list of the different standards that would apply, for example. Of course, NFPA has NFPA 2.
Right.
And that is the hydrogen code. And so, their list of referenced standards and reference publications would be, a great library to just start with, right?
Yeah.
And there's the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Energy Association, which has a hydrogen safety publication. They have a regulatory matrix of the various codes and standards that are in process, being updated, where they stand, and kind of how they're used. And so those would be probably the main ones. But, I think if you asked anybody on the street, have you ever heard of the FCHEA? They'd be like, what? So that's our job, is to really help and amplify those resources and make it known that they're there. And, use them, please, and reach out with questions and stuff. I mean, in California, we adopt, the IFC references NFPA 2.
Right.
And then in California adopts the most recent version. And so right now, because there's the 2023 version, but it's not quite adopted yet because of the way the
code cycle is.
The code cycle and the intervening code cycle, and what NFPA's code cycle is and everything. But there is an information bulletin from the Office of the State Farm Marshal saying, hey, this version's out there. If you use it for alternate means and methods, this is, the most recent version.
Right.
They're not telling the AHJs they have to use it, although it would be good, because it is the most updated, most recent version. Right. So, but not everybody knows that. Even in the fire service, there's people who don't know that. There's also a lot of work that we are doing on the permitting side, because there have been some legislation that's, kind of made some inroads for like solar and wind projects, for example.
Right.
Certainly for some electrical installations. And so we need to have the same sorts of things for hydrogen installations. There was some legislation passed last year for some ease of, timing on the permitting process. But I think there's going to be some more activity in that area, because, if you look at kind of the overlap of the different, like the IRA and the tax credits, and then how long it takes to get a project built and how long it, and permitted, right? And so maybe you're reaching the end of your window for getting your tax credit because it takes so long to get your project on the ground. And so you're not going to get full advantage of those things. So really trying to tie all those things together and sort of streamline that, which I hate that word, but that's kind of the best word for it.
Build efficiencies.
Absolutely. But you know this more than anybody. At the end of the day, it comes down to the individuals, right? So it all comes back to the education and the communication and the outreach, and Yeah. So,
Well, and if they listen to this podcast, right, they're going to know a lot more about hydrogen that they didn't know before. And so I hope that they take the time to listen. Jennifer, you've been very generous with your time. Where can our listeners find more information, one about hydrogen safety, but also find and stay up to date with the California Hydrogen Business Council?
so our website is californiahydrogen.org. We have, like I said, a lot of great resources on there. And if anybody listens and is interested in joining us, we have great opportunities for networking. I mentioned our leadership summit, which anyone can come to. There's a fee for it, but anyone can come to. We will probably have a cap because we pretty much maxed out last year, but that's in June.
Okay.
The Center for Hydrogen Safety, I've mentioned, that's,
Yep.
if you just Google Center for Hydrogen Safety, it'll take you right to it.
Right there.
They also have the H2 Tools resource, which has some of the safety and training resources there. And then CGA, FCHEA, Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Energy Association, the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership. So lots of good, reputable, like solid resources out there. So
Yeah. Yep. Lots of resources. So take advantage of them. There's a lot of free resources out there. I mean, I was able to click around, find a lot of, useful information. And we'll try to include some of that information in the show notes if I can get it all condensed in there a little bit, because there is so much. So,
yeah, I mean,
but
NFPA, even you can browse through the document for free on their site.
Yep.
So, I think there's been a lot of movement that way and trying to sort of ease the pain of getting access to some of this stuff for people.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah. Make it more available, right? More available. So that way we can, be able to obtain those goals and have the information available to us. So Jennifer, as we finish, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Peace, love, and hydrogen, friends.
Well, I maybe I'll be in the market for a new car. Not quite yet. We just bought our last one, so I've got to at least drive it a couple more years before I look for a new one. So definitely probably look for something a little bit cleaner, something a little bit nicer, hopefully in the future. So
yeah.
But,
well, if I'm ever in the area, I'll bring my car by so you can see it. But
I would love to see it. I would love to see it in action.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate all your time today.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate the invitation. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you.